Hi, welcome back to the channel. I am back for the 20 books that I read last year, part 2, 11 to 20. Alright, let's jump right back into it. Number 11 is Moonbound by Robin Sloan. I have no idea how I came across this book. It was very random, but I'm very glad that it found me because I enjoyed it immensely. I was just looking up this book to try to find the words to describe it because it's so, the fantasy is so out there and so not like anything I've ever read before, that I was like, how do I even describe what's going on in this book? This book is about a far future. I think it said 11,000 years past present day. Or I'm trying to figure out if it's present day or 11,000 years past the already kind of sci-fi futuristic world that was the present of the narrator of the book. But it takes place in the extreme future. And because of that, it's very, very high fantasy, very sci-fi. But it does have this anachronistic feel and vibe to it. And I had mentioned in the last video how when it's done well, I really like that. I really like that play between the fantasy elements and the really mundane elements. Like there's these fresh and new ideas, and then there's the look back on human culture through this futuristic lens. And these I'm thinking of something very specific that happens early in the book, but I'm trying not to do spoilers. There are these warping or twisting of familiar images. I really like how he uses anachronism because it makes it feel really like it's the future. Like how I would look back on the 900s. History has been brought into the future in a way that feels really realistic to me. And you know what I really like? It never says people in the past were inherently dumber or worse than people in the present or future. It does criticize some of the fantasy. It's still their present is future. So it does criticize the past society and some of the things that they did, but it still also shows the things that were really good about that society and still brings into the present day lessons that could be learned from that society. And even elements of hope throughout the story are coming from the past. And visions of the future. So I really liked it in that aspect. I also really liked the narrator character. So the story is about a young boy. When I was reading it, I was like, oh, this is a story for adults with a child protagonist. But when I was looking at the author's website just now, it said it was appropriate for younger readers. Specifically, it said precocious young readers. So I think it's middle grade. And I may have mentioned this in the previous video, but to say it again, this is another example of how I like middle grade more than YA. If I had to choose between reading middle grade or reading YA that's more for teens, especially older teens, I would probably pick middle grade. Because I feel when it's done really, really well, it is approachable for a wide range of readership. And I think YA, a lot of YA captures a mindset of it can be really like relatable or really enjoyable for specifically for teens. And I know a lot of adults also read YA, but this to me really affirmed that feeling that I have of, oh, I love middle grade fantasy when it's done really well. But the story is about a young boy named Ariel living in a rural fantasy town. And he goes on a series of adventures trying to find a way to save all the people in his town. But the narrator is what they call a chronicler. And what pronouns does the chronicler use? I don't remember. The chronicler is a like part fungus, part machine who experiences the lives of multiple people because their purpose is to record and archive these, personal histories. The chronicler is basically stuck in their latest subject for this long period of time. And Ariel so happens to find this person's body. So the chronicler jumps ship basically and infects the Ariel and begins experiencing the world through his eyes. So I think that's also a very interesting way of having almost an audience surrogate but it still feels like they belong in the world because the chronicler knows information that's like new to Ariel and has to explain that stuff to him. And Ariel knows information that is buck wild to the chronicler. I liked this book so much that I was immediately like, I need more books like this. What books are like this? Robin Sloan has 2 other books that take place in the same universe, but they're in the past version of this world. For some reason, I didn't want to read them. Later on in the year, I read another one of his books just because I was like, I need that feeling, I need that vibe back in my life, and it was good. So honestly, I should read more of his books. I really love Moonbound. So much happened. I feel like I haven't even begun to scratch the surface of what this book is like. I think it was very beautifully written. Similar to my other favorite children's books or middle grade books, The Neverending Story and The Last Unicorn, Moonbound is a story that is about stories and about relationships, and not just romantic relationships, connection. And I just think that's wonderful. That's something I really like to see in a book, apparently. Number 12. After that, I read Fearing the Black Body. I think the subtitle is The Racial Origins of Fat Phobia by Sabrina Strings. It's a nonfiction book. How I came to know about this book is actually years ago, Kimberly Foster. I don't know if it was on her Kim Foster channel here on YouTube or probably on the For Harriet channel. She talked about reading this book. So it was in my zeitgeist. And then I saw Samira on TikTok. She did a video where she like showed the cover of the book. And I was like, oh yeah, I've been meaning to read that. Because this is a book I've heard about. It's been like around. And I was like, you know what? I want to read nonfiction books. So let me read this book. I do think it's great. The thing about like these history and research books that are about the isms and the phobias is you'll be like, this is a great book. I feel really sad and angry. But what I think is great about this book is it was so enlightening that all of the like discourse and drama and like yap and chatter that goes on about fat phobia on like the internet, I immediately was like, I don't need to feel anything about this anymore. I don't need to invest at all in this discourse or these arguments, because I understand where all this stuff is coming from, and these people who are just like yapping, they don't understand that they're using arguments that were used in the 15th century. They don't understand that their ideas are not original. And now that I understand that, I'm like, I don't need to waste my time or my brain space with this. I definitely recommend this book if you do want to understand the origin of fat phobia and the link to things like racism and sexism. If you don't believe in it, don't fight with me. Either read the book or don't. I don't care. And you know what's wild? You know where the book starts? Is the history of men making a science out of describing the most perfect and beautiful woman. And now here we are. Okay, moving on. Okay, the next book that I read is called Journal of a Black Queer Nurse by Britney Daniels. This is the only memoir that I read of my nonfiction books. This book was okay. It was about a Black queer travel nurse during COVID. I don't think it was just during COVID. It was basically her experience as a travel nurse in general. I'm pretty neutral about this book. I was able to read it. Sorry. It was readable. It was very explainy. I did learn a good amount about exactly what travel nursing entails and hospital life. But it was, again, one of those books where like sometimes you read a book to get angry. But it's because you're in the process of learning. She did bring a hopeful tone to a lot of things. In that, like, it's like, look at these injustices through these different anecdotes and stories. She's very committed to addressing bias and inequality in the work environments that she's in, which I commend her for. That's hard work to do, especially when you're the only one who's really interested in doing it. And one thing that would happen is she brings up an issue to the higher channels, and nothing happens. The person who did wrong isn't reprimanded. It all kind of gets swept under the rug. She leaves, and then years later, administrators and stuff are reaching out to her like, hey, how do you think we can improve? And it's like, wish you would have taken me seriously then, right? So I was like, dang girl, I feel for you. And also, out of all the books I read last year, this is the one that I'm like least excited about. But that's okay. I already knew memoirs aren't really my thing, and it does have that more like casual tone that I also don't like. So those two things considered, I think it's pretty good. Okay, next book, number 14, Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. And this was, I think, my favorite book of the year. I found this book on like a random list or something, and I think I just liked the cover, and I was like, okay, I'll try this. I must have read some kind of description, because I was so interested in it that I was like really digging and searching for a way to read it. And thankfully I found one. But again, this is one of those science fantasy weird books that I absolutely love, but are hard to explain. How it's described on the internet when I look it up right now is as a metaphysical fantasy. Piranesi that's the main character's name. That's what he is called. Piranesi is a man who lives in a dimension. It takes the form of a giant labyrinthine house. And there are hundreds of statues all around depicting all sorts of things. And there is an outside, but outside is kind of not important. Everything stays in the house, and there's an ocean in the house that rises and falls there with different tidal patterns. And sometimes there's animals that get in there. The only people there are Piranesi and the other, who is the man who gave him the name Piranesi. And he's unraveling the mystery of how he came to exist within the house and his own life and his own existence. I really like the metaphysical aspect. There are themes of like occult magic, like rituals, things like that. It's not like horror. It's more like parapsychology research type of occult. And Piranesi has his own like interesting like religious beliefs, things like that about the house, and he's very reverent of the house, which is very interesting. There's an almost like dark academia aspect of it too, to use those kind of tags, and actually pretty heavy on the academia. Piranesi, he's like, you can tell he's very intelligent. He's also very sweet and very tender. And at the end of the book especially, there was one scene that I was like, you are such a sweet, wonderful person for doing this thing, that really it had been mentioned earlier in the story, and it really could have been left there and never mentioned again. Because it was brought back up, I was like, wow, you are so lovely for doing this. I love him so much. He's so lovely to me. I wish I could meet him in real life. He's so sweet and so like loving and caring in a way that shows through all of his actions. He's so like pure intention and only wants good things for people. 15. This was when it started getting to like the last few months of the year, and I was really like, oh, I have to read more books soon, quickly, because I was just like, what, anything, what's something I could read? And I chose The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka, which I have read before. I don't believe I read it for a class. I don't recall ever writing or discussing Metamorphosis. I think I heard about it probably when I was in high school, and I read it out of personal interest. Oh, I read the graphic novel version of The Metamorphosis. That's what. And when I was in college, I took a costuming class, and we were invited to this like costume shop and a few costume shops like around the city. and different like production, like stage production places. And one of the theaters was like, oh, we're putting on a show called Metamorphoses. And I was like, oh, I love that story. Yeah, I'll definitely come. Thinking it was Kafka. And then I sit down and it's like Greek tragedies. I was like, oh. The play was a bunch of stories about change and metamorphosis. And I was like, oh. It was good though. I really enjoyed it. But anyway, the Metamorphosis is about, I feel like most people know this story. It's about a young man named Gregor Samsa who has taken on pretty much complete financial responsibility for his family after his father's business goes under. One day he wakes up late for work to discover he has transformed from a man into a giant bug. He becomes isolated immediately from his family, who are all afraid of and disgusted by him. He can't communicate with anyone. The first time I encountered this story, I was a child. And rereading it as an adult who has had to take on financial responsibilities for other people and take on family responsibilities that were not mine, it stings a lot. It hits so different. I was deeply triggered. And also, before I reread it, someone had mentioned to me when they read The Metamorphosis, they read it through a disability lens. So as I was reading it, I was like, okay, let me try to think of it in that way also. I anticipated I would like the book. But I also, again, sometimes you read to be angry. It's a tragedy in a way, and I think Gregor Samsa deserves self-differentiation. After reading this, I was like, damn, I'm gonna turn into a roach. Oh, I need to change my life. Things have to be different. You know what? It's because Gregor is the oldest sibling. If you're the oldest sibling, read this book and shake your fist. Number 16. I put this on here after I finish it, which is why I started it before some of these other books, but when I finished the book is when I put it on the list. And that's The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. I have an entire playlist about what that was like and how I felt about the book. But in short, first, nonfiction book, self-help book. So The Artist's Way is a 12-week program to reawaken your creativity or refresh your creative process. There's like an introduction chapter, and then you read a chapter a week and do all the activities and exercises in the chapter for that week. Overall, I had a good experience with it. I was proud of myself for doing it, and I feel good about it. I actually gave my copy of The Artist's Way to my sister. The conversations that we were having, I was like, you need to just read this book and like do these activities, and hopefully that will help you. So I liked it enough, or I can recommend it enough, that I literally gave the book to her and I bought her journals and I was like, do this. How I heard about this book, it's in the art zeitgeist. Like if you're an artist or you do creative things, I mean, in general, it's pretty famous. But if you do creative stuff, it's like, it's out like in the air. You like hear about it through osmosis. But how I heard about it really is someone who I follow on Instagram from school posted about using the book. I think I only saw it on their page like once or twice, and they were just like showing the cover, and I was like, oh, interesting. I've heard about that before. And back then, I tried to check out the audiobook version because I thought it was just like essays, which it is. I didn't realize it was like half workbook. So I started listening to it, and I heard the instructions for like, oh, this is something you do a week at a time. And I was like, oh, if I can't use the book in this way. So I returned it. I use the library digitally a lot of the time. So that's how I was listening to the audiobook. It was through the library. I returned it, and then because basically I came to the understanding that if I was going to read this book, I need to get a physical copy and have it like in my possession for 12 weeks. So I ended up buying it. Number 17 is The Maid and the Crocodile by Jordan Ifueko. How I heard about this book is I was scrolling on TikTok and I saw a video of the audiobook reader talking about the book and what she loved about the book. And her enthusiasm for the book and for the main character was what enthused me to read the book. This is a YA fantasy. It's the story of a girl who she basically ages out of the foster care system that she's living in. She ages out of like the orphanage and she has to go find a job. She's disabled from an injury that she got from working in a factory before there was like a huge like social revolution in her world. Social and political. People was fighting. People was dying. But there was a social restructuring in her world and changed like child labor laws. So she was pulled out of that, put in this orphanage. So there's this air around the world of like, oh, we did the revolution. We fixed everything. We toppled the monarchy. But there's still a social hierarchy and she's at the bottom of it. And there is a God who will not leave her alone. She is getting like the call to adventure and she's like, no, leave me alone. I don't want to be the protagonist, which I think is very funny. So she's trying very hard not to engage in the adventure, but it gets her. She gets dragged in and meets a hot boy, YA stuff. I think this book was like a little bit not for me. The thing is, if I really don't like a book, I'm not going to finish it. That's why every book on my list, I'm like, I enjoyed it. I really liked it. The key to that is do not finish books that you are hating. So even when I'm like, oh, I didn't like this that much, I liked it enough to finish it. I was engaged and interested enough to see it through to the end. So that's how I feel about this book in a way, because there are things that I like, but I'm kind of like finding it harder to articulate them than I have with the other books. It was like, you know what? I'll say I like the world building. And I do like this idea of like, everyone's like, yay, the revolution, we fixed it, everything's good now. But like, actually, no, there is still a lower class, even though you think you've gotten rid of all of this. The things that I did not like is, it's not even that I didn't like it, but I was not on board with the romance. I wasn't convinced. Like, I wasn't against them. I didn't think they were like horrible or bored or annoying or anything like that. They didn't like treat each other badly in a way for me to be like, no! They were just like, it was just like, okay. I just wasn't along for the ride. I wasn't getting like the excitement that she was getting being around some guy. I've discovered I don't really vibe with second person. Like if the narration is like, you are this, you're doing that, you go here. Like, no thanks. I didn't consent. I'm here as the observer. I'm not the protagonist. And I also don't like when the narrator is like first person and then they refer to the reader as you, as in like, as if like I'm another character in the book. I'm like, I don't want to be a part of this. So when did I get cast in this play? Just let me watch. I'm here to look. Which this book does in the narration. It's narrated as if the main character is telling the story to someone. And because it's a specific type of person in this social structure who she's referring to, it kind of comes with certain assumptions. And I'm like, no, I'm not that. I don't know. I was just not vibing with that. But it was fine. It was a part of the like rhythm of the story. One thing I did like is there's a lot of singing in the book, and the audiobook narrator did a good job with singing the words a little bit, but still having them be legible. The other thing is, this book is not a part of a series, but it's like related. It's in the same world as other books. And for the most part, I don't read series. I'm literally in the middle of a series right now. Oops. But for the most part, I like to read standalone books. And occasionally I can be convinced to read a series, but if I see something as part of a series, I don't want to read it. I don't want to take part in it. So while I was reading the book, I was like, this is so, like, some of the characters are like, this is so detailed. As I was reading through it, it definitely made sense when I found out that there were other books attached to this world. I will say, though, this is a plus. I did not have to read those books to know what was going on, and I'm very happy for that, because I didn't want to. Those stories that are more the classic, like, fantasy protagonists, I was, like, not interested. No offense to the author, though. Jordan, I'm sure you're doing great. Number 18, I read another Robin Sloan book called Sourdough. I decided to read Sourdough because I was just craving Robin Sloan's writing again. I was like, I need that. I want that. So I picked Sourdough. Sourdough is about a woman who works at a company that makes robotic arms and teaches them to do a bunch of specialized tasks. And she is overworked and depressed at this startup. And the thing that is like healing her spirit is she discovers a delivery-only restaurant where she can get this special soup and sandwich made with this amazing sourdough bread, run by two immigrant brothers. Then the brothers unexpectedly have to leave the country, and they gift her their sourdough starter. And the dough, it's not regular dough. And this sourdough takes her on an adventure. This story is very interesting to me because I think it kind of goes to me on an unexpected trajectory. I don't know what I thought was going to happen, but it's kind of very positive and very uplifting in that there are problems, but at the end of the day, it's not that bad. She like makes a lot of friends. It's pretty cute. And I think the message in the book that I really like and really vibe with is that you can pivot. You can just like change. If you're in the mood for something positive, I would pick up Sourdough. And also this book made me want to bake bread. I was like, I could make sourdough. Cut to me earlier in the year suffering because I had to bake bread. But yeah, it's very nice, very sweet. Next book, number 19, Prescription for Pain by Phillip. I wanted to read this book because the first book I read last year, Pandora's Lab, talks about the opioid crisis and prescription pill mills. These pain clinics where people would go basically to get outrageous prescriptions for narcotics, and like everyone in these communities kind of knew, like, this is where you go to get drugs to use or sell. I heard about this book because I was listening to last podcast on the left. They did a interview with Phillip Isle. Actually, let me check if it's in the free episodes, because I recommend the interview. Yes. It's in the free episodes. So they did an interview with the author Phillip Isle about his book and about the subject of the book, Paul Volckmann. One of the areas of interest in this book specifically is that Phillip Isle's father and Paul Volckmann went to college together. And I think they both went to the same medical school as well. So they knew each other and they were sort of friends. So Phillip Isle gets a lot of the information and direct quotes from Paul Volckmann because he just wrote him letters. These story is very interesting, hearing about the opioid crisis and Appalachia and how people were really taken advantage of in that way was enlightening and interesting. I was unaware of a lot of like this specific stuff. And like I said when talking about Pandora's Lab, when I was reading this book, I was talking about it constantly with other people. So I think that's a sign of how important I felt the information was, that this book inspired me to spread that information among people. Like, my writer brain is like, that is a success in Phillip Isle and a testament to him as a journalist. I also really like that in the book, he names all of Paul Volckmann's victims and dedicates space and time to talking about who they were as people, how their deaths affected their loved ones, and humanizing them as more than just people who were addicted to pain medicine or people who are just the accessories to this true crime story. Very interesting, very informative, good book. I would recommend. It is a little long and a little slow at points, but I think ultimately it's worth reading. Number 20, the last book. At this point, I had like just a couple weeks to finish a book, and I was like, I need to find something to read. I was stressed because I really wanted to like hit this goal. And I was chatting with my friends about how I was looking for something to read and I couldn't find anything that was grabbing my interest. And one of my friends had just finished reading the Iliad, and they were like, read it. It's interesting. It's like not boring. And they said it in a way that it was kind of giving sarcastic, but I was like, if you mean that for real, I will 100% read it, because sure. When it comes to recommending me something, if you just catch me at the right time, I'm diving into it immediately. If you mention an album to me at just like the right time, I'll immediately listen to it all the way through. You just have to catch me on a good day. And they caught me. And they said, read the Iliad. And I said, period. And I downloaded the audiobook from the library because it was available. Of course, I have heard of the Iliad because I went to high school. It's in the zeitgeist. It's through cultural osmosis. I really didn't know what the Iliad was about, honestly, before going into it. I just know it comes before the Odyssey. It was surprising to me. One thing that was surprising to me is I didn't realize the ancient Greek misogyny like went that hard. Like one of like the major points of conflict is these guys fighting over a woman they enslaved. All right. I was like, you want me to care about these people? And they were like, keep going, keep going. They suck, but it gets better. You'll start to care about these men. And it was really interesting. I forgot to mention, it's the Iliad by Homer. This translation was W.H.D. Rouse. So I can speak for this translator that I like it. I like this translation. And I really liked listening to it as an audiobook because you really feel that this story was meant to be an oral history and was meant to be spoken and presented and read out loud. I like listening to it. I felt like I was in a crowd in an amphitheater at times. And also some of the descriptions of the fighting, because this is a war epic. If you don't know about the Iliad, by the way, which I kind of didn't, it is the Trojan War which follows the kidnapping of Helen of Troy. The gods, trifling. Every time one of the gods was mentioned, I was like, you're doing something wild that you should just sit down. I was not a mythology person. I did get into some a little bit, but I was not like, I didn't have that like huge mythology phase that a lot of people had. I was a little interested in Mesoamerica and read a bunch of those stories. But a lot of this like mythology was new to me. And I'm tangenting really bad. Anyway, the other thing that really was this is an oral history vibe is sometimes the story would kind of find ways to take breaks. There's a part that's a description of a shield and all the decorations that are molded onto this shield. And it's like these waving fields and these oxen, and it's like describing, all these little images and little stories that live in the shield, that are a break from like this bigger story of like why they need the shield. And even going to get the shield, that was like, here come these fun new characters who have a totally different vibe, and it's a break from the fighting and the drama. Story structure wise, that was very interesting. I definitely enjoyed it and enjoyed the experience of listening to it and like taking in the story and all the elements. And I was definitely like, I got into the drama where I was like, I can't believe they would do this thing, and like this guy should have stayed where he was at and not done this, or like this fight that these two had, they totally caused all this drama and like hurt so many people from doing this when they just needed to like chill out. It's like, I felt connection to not just like the story and the characters in the story, but also to like past humans and like past societies, which I think was really cool. So that's a wrap on the 20 books that I read last year, part 2. 2024, I read a lot of stuff that was very in my wheelhouse and some stuff that was more new to me, and I feel good about that. For 2025, one of the books that I want to read is The Catcher in the Rye, because I feel like I would like it despite a lot of people saying that I wouldn't like it. Because I feel like people say that based on like demographics, not like the plot of the book. So that's on my list for this year. And other than that, I am reading a series. I'm in the middle of reading Jeff Vandermeer's Area X. I finished the initial trilogy. I'm about to start Absolution, the 4th book. So I'm like, oh, this is why I don't read series. I'm so deep into it, even though I like the books. But so far, my reading goals are, again, 20 books. We'll see if I make it to 24, which is like 2 a month. But I like to take breaks when I'm reading. So thanks for sticking around. Comment in the comments if you have something to say or share about any of these books. Like the video if you like the video. And see you next time.